This episode is sponsored by Hello Honeydew, a leading free utilities concierge service. Hello Honeydew is a free service designed to relieve the stress of a moving house, and it saves you time, money, and headaches on all your essential home service needs. We will hook up your gas, electricity, internet, TV, water, and home security systems in just one 15 to 20-minute phone call. You will also receive a free Amazon Echo Dot just for setting up an appointment. If you have closed on a house and have received your closing date, call us now for a free appointment and a free Amazon Echo Dot at 732-859-2019 and visit us at hellohoneydew.com for more information. From the studios in beautiful Oceanport, New Jersey, welcome to the biggest and greatest podcast ever. I'm your host, Ray K. Hey, we got a pretty cool show today. With me is my guest, all the way from the, I think they call it the Show Me State, which is in Missouri, I hear. Tyler Onstott is with me today. And Tyler, we have a lot of pretty fun stuff to talk about. One of the things I want to delve right into, because I always wondered what it was like. Tyler worked for the one of the most storied franchises probably in Major League history, I guess, even though they didn't win a lot of World Series. But, the Wrigley Field and the whole aura of Chicago Cubs is quite a thing. And Tyler worked for them. Tyler, just get into how you started working with them. I always wanted to talk to someone that actually worked for one of these franchises. So why don't you get back to the beginning, and how did you hook up with the Cubs?
Absolutely, Ray. Well, I appreciate you having me on. Listened to your podcast with Eric last week and really looking forward to our conversation. And so how I started with the Cubs was I actually got hired by the White Sox first. I was living in Chicago at the time. Basketball season was winding down, and so I was looking for some summer jobs. I was working at a restaurant as well part-time, but I was like, I love baseball. I've worked in baseball at the college level. I want to continue maybe seeing if that's a career path I want to go into. And so I saw on the White Sox website, they were hiring for fundraising sellers. So basically 50-50 raffle ticket sellers. And I focused strictly on the car raffle sales. And so I applied, went through the interview with the White Sox and got hired on by the White Sox first. Mm-hmm. And so then I found out that a lot of the people, especially in Chicago, a lot of people who do the 50-50 sales are working for the Bulls, the Blackhawks, the Cubs. And so I thought, I'm going to wait and see if the Cubs are, ever post that job. And sure enough, it was like 3 weeks later, the Cubs were looking for the same thing. And so I put an application in. And at that time, the 2016 season was already underway. And so I didn't expect to hear back just because, everybody wants to work for the Cubs if you're in Chicago. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in one of my classes at Loyola. I was working on my master's at the time. And my phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number, so I didn't answer it. But I did a reverse check on it just to see if it was, potentially a potential employer. At that time, I'd been applying for some jobs, and it came back to Wrigleyville area. And so I called them back, and they said, yes, we got your application. We saw you work for the White Sox. Would you want to come in for an interview? And so I said, absolutely. And so I went in and met with, he's now the manager of team relations. So he's working with the players, families on coordinating time. His name's Jeff. He was the, 50-50 raffle coordinator. Mm-hmm. And so I did the interview. It was a group interview. It was me and one other gal, and we ended up getting hired. And I started like a week later, and I picked a pretty good year to start, I think. That was the 2016 season. So that's kind of how that happened.
Yeah, really. Okay. So that's, it's in the cards now. I mean, that's the year. In the pecking order of things, are the Cubs that much higher than the White Sox, basically?
I wouldn't say, and this is, out of respect to both, because I worked for both employers, and both teams were phenomenal to work for. I still keep in touch with people in the organization. I would say that, I don't want to say there's bad blood between the teams. There's always been that rivalry. But I think for me personally, I've always liked the White Sox. I grew up a diehard Chicago Cubs fan, even living, I'm from Springfield, Missouri area. But I was born in Illinois, so I always grew up a Cubs fan. But I was always taught to respect the White Sox. And I know there's people on both sides who don't feel that same way. If you've got to be one or the other. And so I think both teams offer great opportunities for potential employees, and both teams really take care of their employees. The Cubs gave me a World Series ring, and the White Sox, they have a lot of perks for their employees. So I don't think, you can go by wins and losses and which franchise has more story to it. In that case, I'd say the Cubs. But both teams have phenomenal history, and I really enjoyed working for both teams.
So now you get the deal. You get the job for the Chicago Cubs, 1906, I think, right? That was the last year they won the World Series. Was that the year? I remember that was
1908. Actually, it was. Okay. I think it was 3 in a row. There, it was the Cubs won in 07 and 08, and then I think the White Sox won. The White Sox played the Cubs. I want to say it was 1909 or 1910. Is when they played, and then the White Sox won in 05, but before that I think it was 1918 was the last time they had won. And so just within the last decade or two, a lot of droughts have been broken in Chicago.
Yeah, really. So now in 1916, you got this magical season. I guess you don't know it, of course, at the time, even though, if I recall, the Cubs were, looked like they were going to make some hay, as they say, that year. They had some pretty good players coming up, couple good young guys. So what's it like? You start working for them. Tell me some of your duties working for them.
Yeah, so my first season, and you're right, that first year going in, we all kind of knew going into that season that this could be the Cubs' year. But of course, I'm just going to name some years before that prior, 2003, 07, 08. We all thought that was our year too. And so being a Cubs fan, you're always under that mindset of kind of we'll believe it when we see it type of deal.
Right.
But there was just, I grew up attending Cubs games, even on the road. We would always, take vacations up here, even where I'm at now, St. Louis, to see the Cubs Cardinals, or we'd go to Wrigley Field. But there was just something about that year where the first time I walked into the ballpark as an employee, I made it, I think I started in mid-April. So the season was already 2 or 3 weeks underway. There was just something different I had not ever felt before when coming to Wrigley Field. And so at that time I was doing 50-50 raffle sales for the Cubs. And then the next year, 2017, I switched over and worked in ballpark operations, doing security. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But that first year, there were, because of the Cubs drought and because of the expectations, we were interacting every day. It seemed like there was somebody famous coming by the ballpark to, throw out the ceremonial first pitch or take in the game, whether it was Bill Murray or.
Now, were you involved in that? Were you involved in that, Tyler, as far as meeting some of these celebrities that came in, to throw the first pitch out, or what was your role? Did you just kind of see them walk by, or to what extent did you meet these people?
So I got to meet them just in passing. With my job with 50-50 in 2016, I did not have as much interaction, just because it was one of those roles where, you're seen but never really heard from. And I'm not talking with the fans, but I'm just, if you would see a player, it's just kind of an unwritten rule in baseball. When you're an employee, you don't ask for autographs. You don't, if they say hi to you, obviously say hello back. But don't go out of your way to make conversation. It's just kind of an unwritten rule, not for any particular team, but just baseball decorum in general.
Makes sense.
And so I got to interact with that first year, especially during the playoffs, because they were bringing everybody back. Ryne Sandberg, he, at that time was an ambassador for the Cubs, so I saw him constantly, and I've met Sandberg numerous times. Very nice guy. One of the most down-to-earth baseball players I've ever met. Chip Carey, who I don't know if you, obviously it's Harry Carey's grandson, but I remember coming home from games and coming home from school growing up and watching WGN, and it was Chip Carey and Steve Stone, and I had never met Chip Carey, and so I saw him passing by in the concourse, had a great conversation with him, walked past Bill Murray. Ronnie Woo-Woo and I seemed to run into each other all the time, whether it was at Cubs games or up at Loyola, where I was going to grad school. He always frequented Loyola. And so I got to know, not on a personal level, but, got to interact with him numerous times. And then Mark Pryor, I got to meet. He was throwing out the ceremonial first pitch, and I'd always wanted to meet Mark Pryor. That was my favorite baseball player growing up. I wore 22 playing baseball. growing up. And so when I saw him, I kind of broke that unwritten rule and made sure I went out of my way to go talk to Mark Pryor, and very nice guy, very down to earth. Kerry Wood, Steve Trout. My second year when I did security for the Cubs, you got a lot more of interaction. You were escorting players to the parking lot. So Sandberg, all the players, we went in the same door as the players going into our offices and facilities. And so, all the current players I've interacted with in some way.
So how does that work, Tyler? Let's all right. Well, first of all, you get a ring. I mean, I don't know if every team does that. Is that the standard? As long as, even if you're doing raffle tickets for cars, you get a ring. Or is that just a Chicago Cubs special type thing? Or do they give everybody a ring, basically, if you were part of their run? Getting that ring.
So that's a great question, and that was one I had done a lot of research on. After the Cubs winning the World Series, that was kind of the rumor going around was, are we going to get a ring? And it's actually up to each owner. There's not a set rule. See, the owners are paying for these rings, and so the Ricketts family was very generous, and the Ricketts and even the White Sox, the Reinsdorfs, they really take care of their employees. And so with the Cubs, it was one of those where, every employee, it did not matter if you were part-time, which I was, or full-time. They have different tiers of rings. I believe the Cubs had 3 tiers. So, your executives, your players, your coaches are going to get like the rings with the 108 diamonds. Then the second tier is going to be, I don't know how the Cubs classified it, but I know supervisors got a different rings. And then for me, it was still a World Series ring, just, not as many diamonds or things in it. But so it's up to each individual team. I can't speak for any other team, but I think most teams generally, I believe the Royals in 2015 gave out rings to all their employees, if I remember correctly. So it's up to each individual owner. Okay.
So now your security, what's that like? What time do you have to get in? What time do the ball players come in? Like when a ball player comes in, what do you do? Do you follow them from their car in the parking lot, or take us through that, that maneuver? Like, what do you do for security and, from start to finish?
So it just kind of varied depending on the day, so we would clock in. I was usually there. I think we had to be there an hour before the gates open. We'd have a meeting. But for me, I always like to get there about an hour and a half to 2 hours before. I just kind of like to go in, and that was just for me at that time. I had a lot going on with school, with trying to kind of transition out of coaching, and so Wrigley Field's always kind of been my home away from home, kind of a place where I'm at peace. No matter what's going on in my life, I can go there. And so I always got there early and would just kind of sit. We had a designated section we would sit in for our meetings and just kind of take it all in and so it just varies on the day. Some days you might be out in the bleachers. I spent a lot of time out in the bleachers. And other days you might be working, the VIP lounge, which I did for one of the concerts. And so it just kind of varied, and you don't know until that day when you show up. And so, for me, you didn't really get that much interaction with the players unless you were after the game doing what we called curtain, where because the players' parking lot is across the street from Wrigley Field. I believe it's Gate K, and there's a curtain to kind of separate, so that way when the players are walking out of the locker room, going out of the concourse, they're not bombarded by fans. And so this curtain extends all the way to the parking lot tent. So that's where you got most of your interactions with the players. And again, it wasn't one of those where players were coming up, having a cup of coffee with you, but, they would say hi. Joe Madden always said thank you would look us each in the eye and say thank you. I have nothing bad to say about any of the players. They were all very respectful, and even getting to work buses, I got to work visiting team bus and interact with, some of the visiting teams. And of course, I don't know if you're familiar with Wrigley Field, but the visiting clubhouse is actually, so where you go in, I believe it's down by Gate D, over there, kind of going towards the L train, and the players actually have to walk through the concourse to get to and from their locker room. And so, usually when the players are leaving, especially on getaway day, which is, the team just finished up a 3-game series and they're heading to the airport to fly to their next city, sometimes they want to get out of there ASAP while fans were still in the ballpark. And so, you kind of had to keep the fans away, nicely, but just making sure that, players are able to get from point A to point B without any hiccups was our main job. And then, of course, in the game, you're doing crowd control, you're monitoring, hey, who's maybe had a little too much to drink, who's
what was the
underage.
worst incident that way? Did you ever have someone come on the field, or like what kind of things happened?
For us, when I worked, it was usually fans were really mannered well. You always had your incidents where I don't think, at least when I was there, somebody ran on the field. Of course, if you go on YouTube, there's several instances. But they've really done a good job, especially in Illinois. I believe it's a felony now to run on a Major League Baseball field in Illinois or in the city of Chicago. And so, it used to be a misdemeanor charge. And then I don't know if you remember, I believe it was 2002 or 2003 when at a White Sox game, those two fans sitting they'd come down from the 500 level and went down and attacked the Royals. I believe it was the first base coach, Tom Gamboa. And they had attacked him. And so at that time they were having, it seemed like every week somebody was running on the field. So then that's when they decided to kind of put their foot down and say, no, we're going to upgrade this to a felony. And you're usually, as security, pretty good about recognizing beforehand who you need to keep your eye on, who maybe has had a little too many before they even entered the ballpark. So I can't really speak to any specific incidents, but it was generally, fans were usually, there was always the friendly banter, but fans were generally well behaved. Okay,
so now you're working in security. Tell me your feelings on that. Was that your expectations? Were you having the time of your life? Was it a little boring as you're going through the year, or what's it like?
Yeah, so it was obviously coming off a World Series year, the expectations are still really high. But it was really interesting. With 50-50, that job you got to interact with a lot more fans because you're moving around, but because, you've got to make sales and you really don't have time to chat with people. It's where with security, especially when you're working the bleachers, you're standing out with your back to that wall, starting, when gates open all the way to, the end of the game. And so, and of course you got breaks and stuff, but you really got to know people around you. There's people I still stay in touch with who I just met, they were sitting in the first three rows of the bleachers and I was there all game, and to pass time you're talking. And I always like to ask them, kind of about their first visit to Wrigley Field, some of the things they've seen. Because as a baseball fan, I'm curious. And you and I were talking earlier about, curiosity and things. That's what I'm curious about is, how did people become Cubs fans? Were they jumping on the bandwagon in 2016 when we were winning, or even 2015 when we started to win? Or were they like me, and I was basically born with a Cubs binky already in my mouth at the hospital in Winfield, Illinois in 1992? And so I just enjoy hearing every fan has a story, and some are just, you can just tell the passion there. And even with the White Sox, I was doing 50-50 sales, but I got a lot more interaction with fans there as well. And the White Sox, I have to say, the Cubs have passionate fans, but the White Sox has, I think, if not the most passionate fans in baseball, pretty close, because those fans, they show up to games, I'm talking about the diehards. It might not be sold out, but you'll see the same fans coming. It doesn't matter if the team's 20 games out of first or in the playoff run, they're showing up to the games, and they're just passionate about that team. And so that was probably the coolest experience for me, was interacting with the fans and getting to know their story and how they became a Cubs or Sox fan.
Was there a difference between working for the Cubs or the White Sox, or was it like mostly the same experience, or, did you like one a little better than the other working, or was it similar?
It was similar. Mm-hmm. I think because the Cubs, were selling out a lot of games, mm-hmm. and because the concourses are if you ever go to Wrigley Field, which I definitely recommend going. I mean, every baseball fan, there's two stadiums in baseball where if you're a fan, you have to go, or I'll say three: Fenway Park, Yankee Stadium, and Wrigley Field. Mm-hmm. So have you been to all three of those? I have. So I actually I've done a tour of Fenway Park, and then I was at Old Yankee Stadium in 2006. I was actually there a week before they broke ground on the new stadium and saw the Angels play the Yankees. And then I just went to the new Yankee Stadium. I did a tour about 3 weeks ago when I was out in New York. And so I've been to those. And then, of course, obviously Wrigley I've been to more times than I can count.
So
All three.
Which ones of those three impressed you the most? 1, 2, 3. How do you rank those three? Those. What do you think? What do you think of Yankee Stadium, the old one? What do you think of it? The aura and so forth.
History, just a lot of history. And at that time I was in 7th grade. And so I don't really, I remember it, but I really wasn't taking it all in. I don't think I really understood until later what it was like being at Yankee Stadium, but it was a neat stadium. Fenway Park, just, the Green Monster, getting to sit out there and, all the, watching Fever pitch. And it's like, this is the Green Monster, and then Wrigley Field. So I would say, obviously, I'm going to be biased here and say Wrigley Field. I would say Old Yankee Stadium after that. And then Fenway Park would be third. But I'm going to throw in another stadium here, Ray, that I went to back in 2002. That's probably my favorite stadium outside of Wrigley Field, and that's Coors Field out in Colorado.
Okay.
You've got the mountains in the background, great facilities, clean. The fans are friendly. I really enjoy going to Coors Field in Colorado as well.
Okay, I haven't heard that yet. That's interesting. I'll have to put that on my list. I want to see every ballpark. Once summers, that's one of my dreams. To see them all. What makes Wrigley so special?
A couple things, Ray, and I can speak both from the employee perspective, especially working in ballpark operations, and I can speak from the fans' perspective. So first, from the fans' perspective, it's one of those, and I think Eric mentioned it last week on your podcast. It used to be, and it kind of still is, a place where it didn't matter what the team was doing on the field. It didn't matter how many. The fans were showing up to the game, and it was a party.
It was, okay.
Yes, and I think it's kind of turned now. Fans want a winner. Especially after 2016, the expectations are so high. And as a fan, I'm happy because it's like, okay, we're not finishing, 20 games out of first place. We're in contention every year, which is how you want it, obviously. But I think the history, kind of the fans definitely make it special. The bleachers, when I think of Wrigley Field, I think the rooftops, the scoreboard, and the bleachers, and Harry Carey. And so, having all those and the history that's gone on there. And I think there's just something different about Wrigley Field. I took my best friend to Wrigley Field for the first time 2 years ago. And all year I was trying to describe what it was like about going to Wrigley Field. I said, I can't describe it. I said, you just got to go.
Got you. Right,
and so I took him to a game, and he looked over at me. Of course, at this time, this was actually the game where I think the Cubs gave up 10 runs in the first inning. So it was going to be a long day for me. They were playing Pittsburgh. And he looked over at me midway through the game and said, I know exactly what you're talking about now. And he's been to Major League Baseball games before, but he said there's just something different. So I really can't describe it, but I would definitely say the history, the neighborhood, and just the passion the fans have is what makes Wrigley so special. From an employee's perspective, I think what makes it special is that, for me, especially security, you're the first person sometimes, I can't say how many times fans would come up and they're in their 40s or their 50s or even their 60s saying, this is my first time at Wrigley Field. And, I lucked out. I wasn't even a year old when I went to Wrigley Field for the first time. And just to see, you're the first person representing the team that they see. And so anything you can do to make their day. And the Cubs and the White Sox both really go out of their way for their fans and to make it special. I've seen fans propose at games. I've seen fans, get married. Actually, there was one game where there was a wedding going on out in the bleachers during the middle of the game.
Really? Wow. That's wild.
It kind of threw me off. But I think just because there's so many, and look at the Ricketts family. He met his wife there at the bleachers. People meet each other there, and then they turn into family. It's like one big family, and that's what made it so special for me. Was I was living 8 hours from home. And I have family in the Chicagoland area, but, family I could go see every day. And the White Sox and Cubs were, and to this day, I still consider them family. And that's the fans, the people I worked with, the people, sometimes players you got to know who used to play, you got to know. Steve Trout's one of the funniest players I ever got to interact with.
Okay.
So just kind of that family atmosphere is what makes it so special.
Right. What, when you, on your bio, Tyler, you grew up in sounds like a pretty classic small town lifestyle. And now you move into as I was reading your biography, now you're in Chicago, which is, I don't know what number city it is in the country, but it's a pretty huge city, if not number 2, maybe 1 as far as size, right? It's up there.
It's number 3, but I think it's about to get passed by Houston. I think they're saying next year, the year after, it will become number 4. But you're right, it's okay. Huge. It's not as big as New York, but it's definitely got that. You go there and it's a city. I mean, you're in the middle of the city.
So what's that like? Being a small town kid, and now you're in the in the third largest city in the U.S. Tell me that experience.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that, Ray, because that's a big part of my story and who I am now. I grew up in a great town of 6,000 people. I mean, and the town I grew up in, everybody knows everybody. Everybody cares about one another. It's a great town. But I've always been a city person. I've visited New York. I've visited Chicago many times. I've been to Honolulu, Hawaii. I've been to Orlando, Florida several times. So I've traveled, especially getting into my college experience, with college basketball and baseball. I've traveled, it seems like, all over the place. But until you actually move to a big city, and you have to understand, I was 22 years old living on my own for the first time. Mm-hmm. I thought I was prepared for that change. I thought I was prepared for that. Everybody talks about a culture shock, and I'm like, I basically grew up going to Cubs games, even though I lived 8 hours away. There's not going to be a culture shock. And so my best friend, we made the drive up there from my hometown. It was an 8-hour drive, and he stayed with me to kind of help me get acclimated to my new surroundings. I was living right downtown, right behind the Water Tower, John Hancock Building area, right there in what they call Gold Coast. So I'm right in the heart of it. And at 22 years old, I'm like, man, I've got it here. This is awesome. And then my best friend leaves, and then I realize I am on my own for the first time, and I was shitting in my pants, pardon my French, going, what have I just got myself into?
Which is a normal reaction, I bet. I bet that's a normal thing, right?
It is. It is because, no matter how much, I was actually telling somebody last week, no matter how much you prepare yourself to live in a city, until you actually do it, you're never going to be fully prepared. Mm-hmm. I've visited cities constantly, and there's just, you're going to go to the grocery store. I grew up going to the grocery store knowing I'm probably going to have 4 or 5 conversations between grabbing my groceries and the checkout line, because you're running into people all the time, which is great. I love interacting with people. I love networking and getting to know people. So then I'm going to, the Jewel Osco there on State Street, on Grand and State. That's where I shopped at when I lived there, and going to the store and not recognizing anybody. So that was a culture shock. And then the big thing for me was, the public transportation. I had a car growing up, and I did not take my car to Chicago. And so getting used to taking the L every day. And that was I think I could write a book on the Chicago L train. And I'm sure, I know you said you live in New Jersey. I'm sure you might have similar experiences with the New York City subway. Mm-hmm. But there is just a lot of things that you come to appreciate about back home. I always thought, man, I'm ready to leave a small town and go out and do something in a big city and make a name for myself in a big city. And, it's great. I had 3 wonderful years in Chicago, but it's not all it's cracked up to be either. And some of those experiences, too, help make me who I am, in that I'm now living in a city. St. Louis is a city, but it reminds me a lot of Springfield, Missouri. You're bound to run into somebody walking down the street, but you still have that city. So it's a good balance between both.
What did you prefer, the city or the small town?
I think both have their perks. Mm-hmm. For me, I like interacting with people, and so I miss that about the small town. And I think I miss a lot of my friends. Of course, a lot of my friends growing up have actually went on to move to big cities. One of my good friends actually just moved to D.C. A friend of mine from my high school speech and debate years, she's living in New York now. And so, a lot of people have moved on from those small towns, but you always, it's that Midwestern family values mm-hmm. type roots that I come from. And so I think I miss that. And I do miss, interacting with neighbors and stuff. Because in an apartment, we have, especially here in St. Louis, we have get-togethers. I attend all of our apartment get-togethers, so I get to know people. And so there's that. But for a city, I think there's a lot more opportunities, especially with, I have an MBA from Loyola Chicago. And so, with an MBA, you basically have to move to a big city because that's where the jobs are, at least the jobs that are going to pay well.
Right.
I think there's that. And to be quite frank and biased here, again, I think, if you're a sports fan like I am, having access to, a Major League Baseball team or hockey team or a pro sports team, I think is very valuable. And for me, I grew up going to stadiums and ballparks. And so that's a big thing I look for with moving is, am I going to be able to go to ball games, at night when I get off work at 5 o'clock or, do I have the opportunity to maybe work part-time again for a team? And so, it's got its perks, but I definitely don't miss the L stopping above the Chicago River because of
right,
maintenance ahead, and we shall be moving shortly is the announcement they make. I don't miss that, and but outside of that, I really think that for me personally right now, St. Louis is the perfect fit for me, and so I would say of all three of them for where I'm at in my life now, St. Louis is probably the best option for me at this time.
Nice. Good. Now, Tyler, we met through Eric Cusin, which is great, and when we were talking earlier, you're I don't know if it's a mission you're on, or we were talking about it, how athletes after they leave the limelight and in their athletic world, go through some emotional turmoil. Can you talk about that a little bit? I don't know if most people know that. You think, oh, these athletes are Superman. Yeah, all right, so they play 13 years and they leave, so they'll be okay, but not always the case.
Absolutely, and I can speak. Again, I played growing up like youth sports. I can't speak from a specific like college athletic perspective in terms of as a player. But I spent 6 years in college basketball, 4 at Missouri State. I worked 3 years under Paul Lusk and the men's basketball team, and then 1 year under Kelly Harper, who you might remember Kelly Jolly. She won 3 national championships at University of Tennessee. And so I worked under her and her husband, John. They're the head coach and assistant coach down at Missouri State, and then overlapped by 2 years of video coordinator under Keith Gooden with the Missouri State baseball team. And then I did 2 years of I was a manager my first year and then got promoted to a graduate assistant at Loyola under my first year. I worked under Cheryl Swoops, who is considered the Michael Jordan of women's basketball. And then my second year, I worked under Kay Doctor, who was a standout player at Bowling Green. I believe she's their all-time leading scorer there, if I'm not mistaken. And so all these experiences, I've worked under many coaches. But what a lot of fans don't see is what you were just talking about. I've been around players who, they go through and they're in the spotlight starting from middle school, high school. They're being recruited by these top programs. They go, they play, and then they just kind of drop off the face of the earth. And I've always wondered, why is that? They had it, they were on billboards, in the town, or they were, hosting their own camps when they were here. And, a lot of people think they just move on, but that's not the case at all. I've seen where players, fall into maybe depression or they say, I want out of college. I know several players who couldn't wait to get out of college basketball. And then, I'm talking to them a year or two later and they miss it because they miss, being around those families. Those teams are like families. And so they miss being around their family. They miss getting their education paid for and meals. I mean, when I was at Missouri State, we were eating meals. It seemed like, Texas Roadhouse catered in all the time. There's a place down there called Big Whiskey's, barbecue places. So you're getting meals catered. You're getting taken care of as a college athlete. And so I think that's part of it.
So the players take it for granted, it sounds, until after they leave. Is that accurate?
I wouldn't say. I think it depends on the player. I don't think I won't say take it for granted, Ray. I would say they don't appreciate necessarily what they have until they no longer have it anymore. And I think we can all agree in some way, shape, or form. That's life, For me, living in Chicago, I don't think I really. I took it in that I worked for the Cubs and the White Sox, but I don't think you really appreciate and understand what it meant to you because you're so busy in the moment. You're trying to do your job. You're trying to, make the fans around you happy. You're trying to win ball games. But until you take a step back, and I think that's where a lot of college athletes, and I'm not a psychologist or an expert on this by any means, but I mental health and taking care of yourself is a big big thing for me, and anything I can do to promote that, especially with athletes, because they do, kind of go through symptoms afterwards of, hey, I miss playing, or hey, I miss this and that. And, I miss being in the spotlight. That's probably the biggest thing I've seen is players miss being in the spotlight. People coming up to them asking for their autograph, even at the college level. And then now they no longer have that. And I think it takes, for a lot of people, it's a tough pill to swallow.
Well, when you think about it, now that I'm just starting to think about it, you get your premier players. You get your Jordans, you get your Shaqs, you get your Kobe Bryants. You always think of these super high profile players. I'm talking basketball, but in all the sports. Then they always go on to either be announcers. You always see them in the studio, or they're baseball announcers, or they're on commercials. But you don't think that's probably like 1% of them. What happens to the other 99% of the sort of average to pretty good players that once they retire, that's it. Like you don't see them again. Maybe they're working normal type jobs, or there's got to be some kind of void there. Now that I'm thinking about it, and it must be a lot of them. Correct? There must be a ton of athletes that are going through this. Just the numbers game.
Absolutely. A lot of players, will get into coaching afterward, not necessarily pro players at the pro level, but some will. One of my friends that I worked with at Missouri State, I think he played 7 or 8 years of minor league ball, made it all the way up to AAA, and, had some offers to go back to spring training, but decided he wanted to move closer to home, finish his degree, and work with the college team. And so a lot of players, that's their way of giving back, is to go back and coach, whether even high school level or you have the traveling baseball programs going around, where they're going around the country. So that's their way of giving back. But a lot of these players, and I think I was listening to a podcast with Theo Fleury, who I'm a huge fan of, and he said, now a lot of these hockey players, they're making money where they're set for life. But, you look at your players way back in the day who, they weren't making that much money, and, they're having to go out and do autograph signings to make a buck because they weren't paid that well back then. And, that's all changed because of, collective bargaining agreements and stuff. But and a lot of players do get into financial trouble after they play. They've made all this money and they think that, the income's still going to come in, and they kind of spend it, like they're still making that kind of money when they're not. And then some players just go get normal jobs, and you would never know that they ever played before. And so it's really, I don't want to say phenomenal, because the stories can be sad at times. But I would say that it's kind of like what you were saying, that wide range of some are on TV and some are normal jobs. And I think personally of the minor league players who maybe never made it pro, maybe made it up to AA, AAA, where they're not making any money at all. They're playing, they're basically playing for the love of the game to try to make it. And then they go back to whatever their life was before that, and for a lot of these guys, that's all they know is playing baseball. They leave school early, or they get drafted straight out of high school. They don't have that college degree to kind of back them up. They don't have, maybe a savings account saved up where they can move. So they basically are starting over from scratch. And I think that has a lot to do with, post-athletic issues that players have, is that they don't have something to fall back on. And that's why I'm a big proponent, Ray, of, I know when you commit to a university, like let's say I'm going to go play baseball at, University of Miami, I have to be there unless I come from a JUCO, I have to be there for 3 years before I'm draft eligible again. And, a lot of players do finish their degrees in 3 years, and so they can do that. But a lot of players, leave school early, and it depends on the signing bonus. Some people get $1 million signing bonus. Other people get a signing bonus to go to spring training, a plane ticket to spring training as their signing bonus. So that factors in. But I'm a big proponent of finishing out, your year, unless you're going to get like $1 million signing bonus, and sticking out and finishing that degree. So that way, if baseball doesn't work out, number one, you're not going to be, play 7 or 8 years and then have to go back and finish up school. You've already got that degree. And second, you've got something to fall back on. If you get hurt and don't make it above single A, what am I going to go do now? Oh, I've got this business degree from wherever that I'm going to go get into private business or wealth advising. A lot of players get into, being wealth advisors. And I don't know if that's just kind of an industry thing or what, but, and some players go and do public speaking thing. There's a wide range of what players do post-career, but I'm a big proponent of finishing school, that's for sure.
It's almost like I just thought of an analogy, like an empty nest with parents, and your kids leave, and then you go through, you hear about a little depression because now the kids are away from you, and you got to get this new life. And it seems like sports, there's sort of an empty nest thing, and now it is a little bit sad. You could see where the player, now you don't got the baseball, even a college athlete that's a great pitcher, and now he doesn't get drafted, and that's it. I mean, there's no more baseball. The dream's gone. I guess it's always nice to have that dream, and now you got to go out there and try to get a job. I mean, it's got to be rough. I mean,
yeah,
it just has to be. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll speak. I didn't play, so I can't speak from that experience. But I'll speak from my experience of leaving the Cubs and White Sox. Last year, and I knew I was ready to. I graduated from Loyola. And I knew it was my time to leave Chicago. I had great times in Chicago, but you just kind of know when it's time to go. And so I didn't want to move back home. I wanted to stay kind of in a city, but I also wanted to be close enough to go back to Chicago because I have a lot of great friends and family up there who really took care of me when I was in Chicago and got me through, if I was having a hard time with school or with work or whatever, there were a lot of people in Chicago that really cared for me and took me under their wing. And so I wanted to be able to be close to them as well as my family back home, who means the world to me. And so St. Louis was the perfect spot. But the White Sox and Cubs really took care of me. And walking out of the ballpark for the last time, was just really one of the hardest things I've had to do. I knew it had to happen just because I was working part-time and, wanted to leave Chicago. The White Sox, fortunately, this last season let me finish out. If I wanted to come back and work a game, I think I did it 2 or 3 times where I'd take the train up for a weekend and then work the game up there. So that was pretty cool that they allowed me that opportunity. Even though I'd moved, hey, you can, anytime you're back in, come work the game. But this year's going to be, for me, a little different because, I've been involved with the game of baseball since I was 4. And now I'm kind of in a position where, I'd like to get on maybe part-time baseball somewhere or coaching again. But you go through, when you have something that you've invested so much time, money, and effort in, and then, just to kind of leave. And even though I left on my own terms because I was moving, it's still that part of you will always be with you. The experiences that I've had, the seeing Harold Baines every day, saying hi to Harold Baines, who's Hall of Famer, one of the greatest baseball players in White Sox history. Jim Thome. I mean, I vote him and Mike Sweeney the nicest people in baseball I've ever met are Jim Thome and Mike Sweeney. Mm-hmm. And Jim Thome I met working for the Cubs, just phenomenal, down-to-earth guy. And it's like, you have these experiences, and now you're moving, you go to a new city you've never really experienced before or lived in, and you don't have baseball, so you don't have kind of what I was talking about earlier in the podcast, that family atmosphere. And so it's different, and it's one of those.
So you're going through something then,
Yeah, I mean, I think, my heart and my roots will always be with the Cubs and White Sox. The White Sox gave me my first opportunity in pro baseball, and the Cubs followed up with letting me work during the greatest year, I think, in Cubs history. And so, yeah, so I think I'm going through, I'm not going to lie, I'm enjoying going back as a fan now. Mm-hmm. Towards the end there, I'm not going to say I experienced burnout, but you do kind of know, okay, maybe I want to go be a fan again. Those thoughts ran through my mind, but then you move and it's like, oh man, I'm not interacting with these guys anymore. I'm not showing up to the ballpark and basically getting, I'm not going to say free ticket to watch the game because you're working, but you're there. I was there for the Burley Day. I was there for Hawk Harrelson's last game. I was there for, when the Cubs went to the World Series, I was standing right there. Now I didn't see the double play that happened because I think I had my eyes were full of tears because I was just like, man, this is actually, after 2003, that heartbreak. And then I'm actually there. And the whole time, all I could think about was my dad. My dad's a diehard Cubs fan. All I could think about was, man, he's gone through so many years more than I have of not being able to see the Cubs win. And here I am standing here at 24 years old. And, ninth inning hits Aroldis Chapman, who's our closer at the time now, Yankee, his music hit. Mm-hmm. And the Cubs are up 5-0. And I saw who the Dodgers had coming up. I believe it was their 3, 4, and 5 hitters. And I just started crying, right? I was like, oh my gosh, like the Cubs are going to, barring a major incident, the Cubs are going to go to the World Series. So we get the first out, get a couple guys on base, and it's like, okay, all we need is a double play. When I saw that ground ball hit the shortstop, I was like, don't Alex Gonzalez and bobble that play like at 0-3. And I mean, when it turned smoothly, that place just erupted. And so I think about those moments and how I got to be a part of something. My goal in life was just to see the Cubs win a World Series, let alone be working for the team, get a ring, get the experiences I've had. And so you missed that. And I think, too, just being able to say, hey, I work for a Major League Baseball team, whether it's part-time, full-time, you have that on your resume. Nobody will take that away from you. And you can talk about being there for all those days. I can talk about, being there the day, Chris Sale got sent home because he cut up all the jerseys because he didn't want to wear that particular, it was a throwback day and he didn't want to wear that particular jersey that day. And so he was supposed to start and he decided to take scissors and cut all the jerseys up in the locker room before the game. You get that, you're privy to a lot of information. That's probably the biggest thing I miss is being privy to, and not so much on the 50-50 side, but more in ballpark operations. You are privy to a lot of information. You're seeing the players. If a player's just been sent down, you're seeing them go to their car instead of getting on the team bus for getaway.
Yeah, right. Wow. Yeah.
So being privy and so that my heart and my roots will always be with the Cubs and Whites, and I'm forever thankful to both organizations, and especially the White Sox, because they gave me that. They took a chance on a 23-year-old kid to give him his first job and give him a chance to work in pro sports. And I'll forever be grateful for that. And maybe someday I'll get that opportunity again. But I'm pretty content with what I'm doing here in St. Louis.
Nice.
I love what I do. So.
Nice. So you got a great perspective of looking at it, the way you're looking at it. I mean, that's fantastic. I want to hear how, Tyler, you got involved with. We're all a little crazy with Eric Houston, and I mean, this segue is perfect because of these issues that the athletes go through, and Eric has a nice forum to kind of help the athletes deal with all that stuff they go through. Tell me how you got involved with that.
Yeah, so actually, my story is going to date back to 2002. So baseball is my favorite sport. Even though I coached basketball for 6 years, hockey has always been my second favorite sport. I love hockey. And my favorite hockey player of all time is Theo Fleury. And I saw him play in 2002. The Hawks were playing the Wild. I had tickets. I was actually my cousin's using one of my cousin's tickets. It was like 2 rows from the ice. We were sitting by the players' family section. And so it was like my first NHL game. And so being there, taking in, at the United Center, which in my mind is my favorite hockey basketball arena outside of Madison Square Garden. It's my favorite by far. Mm-hmm. And Theo was just, just phenomenal, could skate. And that game, he ended up scoring. The Hawks ended up tying the Wild 2-2 in overtime. And I was like, man, that guy is phenomenal. And now this was towards the end of his career. I think he ended up playing 54 games for the Blackhawks. And then, he made his comeback with the Flames in training camp in 2009. Didn't make the team, but, great way to end his story was just kind of what, making that comeback and what he's done since then. But so, I followed the rest of his career and then started following what he was doing because, I'm into that kind of stuff. I like following up with, because of this issue, following up what are players doing now? What are they, are they doing public speaking things? And so I was actually in New York City and I found out, I'd been on LinkedIn with Theo and Eric and several people who are involved. And so I ended up finding out there was going to be an event there, a comedy show. So I thought I'll go to the comedy show. And I ended up messaging Eric on Facebook through the We Are All Little Crazy website. Said, hey, I'm a huge Theo Fleury fan. Would love to come by and meet him and see the comedy show. And if that's okay. I was going to buy a ticket, obviously, so I did, and got to meet Theo, and it was great. And then just really got to know Eric and heard his story and found out that he also used to live in Chicago, and he helped kind of start the Chicago Sky, a very successful WNBA team there. Mm-hmm. They play out they were at Allstate Arena on Rosemont, but I believe they are now downtown. I think them and DePaul now share an arena right downtown, I think at McCormick Place. And so just got to know him and started exchanging emails and ended up exchanging numbers and texting back and forth since then. And again, we've been on LinkedIn prior to the event, but after that event's when I really started to get to know him. And then, a couple of weeks ago, he texted me and was like, hey, would you be interested in doing some volunteer work for us? And so I said, absolutely, I would love to do some volunteer work. And so I've been kind of helping them out, and it's been phenomenal because you're right. It's a cause that means a lot to me, and not just for athletes. They do, one of our pillars is veterans, and just anybody who needs a platform for mental health and awareness is a great cause. And then definitely having that athletic background and bringing the contacts that I can, especially at the college level, to help out in any way I can. I think it was just a perfect opportunity because I could help people and a topic out that I'm passionate about. But I can also, for me, benefit in that, I know I'm making a difference, whether it's, hooking somebody up from a college with our program to hopefully bring the program down to that university or helping take in whatever I can off Eric's plate to help him out. So it's definitely been a great opportunity for me. And it all started back just, being a fan and then kind of following up and saying, hey, look at the work that these athletes are doing. And not just Theo, but, Darren Ravel's involved. Shamika Hortzclaw's involved, who was actually Coach Kelly's teammate for 4 years at Tennessee, who I worked under, as I mentioned earlier, Kelly. Kevin Stevens, former NHL player. I believe you mentioned Jim Dowd, who I believe you've interviewed. He's involved. And so, we have a lot of athletes who are involved in this, and it's because we are all passionate about this topic and wanting to raise awareness.
Now, this is athletes. This is veterans from armed services. This is everybody. It's just not the athletes. But you mentioned veterans. Many issues they have coming back from war. Which is of course they're going to have issues. So this also helps them. Then Tyler, Eric's platform here.
Absolutely. So, and I believe Eric mentioned it on his podcast. And if you're listening to this and get a chance, definitely listen to Eric's podcast as well. The interview you did with Eric, it was phenomenal. But so our mission is, we all go through experiences, whether you're a veteran. I have a lot of friends who are veterans, that I went to high school with. Whether you're an athlete, whether you're not an athlete, we all go through, 5 and 5, they say 1 in 5, 3 and 5, but we all go through experiences, whether it's, you lose your job or you get a divorce or you come back from, like you said, a war and, develop something like PTSD. So we all go through these experiences and, taking care of, mental health well-being is a huge part of what I want to say, moving forward and trying to get through those tough experiences. And, some experiences, might be, I don't want to rank them, but some experiences might be more of a concern than others in terms of, what I call something like losing your job, very traumatic, but I take it from a perspective of it's a temporary inconvenience. We're going to get through this. It's a, awful experience, but we're going to get through it and we're going to, we're going to hopefully, overcome that and maybe find a better job or something that we're more happy doing. And so this is just to raise awareness that, hey, we all go through traumatic experiences and we're all in this together and we all have, are trying to fight the good fight, and that's, mental health well-being.
Now, you mentioned Theo. He went public. He had some major issues with his coach, which if everyone can go check it out online. He's been doing numerous interviews and quite gutsy to come out with that. I don't know if that's the right word, but I guess maybe courageous, to tell his story, which I guess helps him and helps other people that, keeps things hidden, including, the gymnastics coach, from last year with the girls. And then I imagine all those thousands of victims are going to go through major problems, even moving forward, even after they got justice, I guess if I could call it justice. But, I had for all those girls and others, it's going to be a road. I don't know if you ever get over it. I guess you're always working on it. And this is something that you're saying then, Tyler, and Eric said, and what shocked me was everybody could benefit from using this website. Everyone suffers from PTSD. Is that the right pronunciation? The right
yes.
Code for it? Okay.
Yes.
So it's just, anyone that has suffered, would you recommend them to come to this website, or what do they do? Say I had a big issue that I don't want to disclose. I'm ready to come out with it now. What do I do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would definitely reach out to somebody. You can visit our website, wearealllittlecrazy.org. Definitely, send. I believe there's contact information for us. Eric is more than happy to talk to anybody. I've seen him. I've seen him, pick up the phone at 11:30 at night to call somebody. So he's very open to that, and just finding someone. I would say, finding someone, no matter what you're going through, if you need to tell somebody something, finding someone who you can kind of confide in and telling them. Theo's got a great song. It's called, You're Only as Sick as Your Secrets. It's on his Playing with Fire album that was released in 2015. And it's like, he's correct in that, the more and more stuff you just let in and you don't tell somebody, the more and more it kind of builds up, which can lead to further problems. And so, for me, I would definitely recommend finding somebody who you can talk to, whether that would be, somebody through our organization or a counselor or a key trusted teacher, or coach or mentor or family member, whoever it is. And, but definitely check out our website because, not only are we, Ray, geared toward helping athletes and veterans. I mean, anybody can be a part and be a part of, I believe, our sit downs. We do sit downs all across the campus or all across the country at different campuses. We were recently, I believe, at Providence, Long Beach State. I know Loyola of Chicago, my alma mater, had a sit down with Daniel Carcillo, who's a former Blackhawk. And so, I definitely recommend checking our website. We have a testimonial page on there. It's called, I believe, our Daily Heroes, where people write in their story, and sometimes some people remain anonymous and tell their story, and to read some of the comments on our Facebook page and our Instagram saying, hey, I went through that same thing too. I lost my job too recently, and here's how I coped. It can serve as definitely a platform for people to help other people. And I think for me, that's what I benefit from the most is, I think I'm a firm believer in helping is healing, because I have so many people who helped me along the way, whether it was coaches, whether it was teachers, at Loyola when I switched over to the business program and basically had to start over because I'd left my previous degree program and the teachers who helped me. And now it's kind of, for me, I want to return the favor and be like, hey, I've been there, whether that's having to leave a job or graduating school going, I don't know what to do now. Here I am living in Chicago with a lease and, basically no job. And what am I going to do? And so, and I've had people mentor me. So anything we can do to help, and we have contact information on the page. And it's a great page to just read and hear the testimonials and see what we're doing and how active we are across the country.
Excellent. Tyler, that was, thank you for sharing all of that. I wanted to talk more about your coaching, but maybe we'll have another show about that because I'm very fascinated by that aspect. I want to get into our final aspect of the show, which is my hit and miss, which is, we were talking earlier, it's the word association. First word that comes to mind, or 2 words or 3 words, whatever. I'm going to shoot out a word association. You tell me what comes to mind. Favorite color?
Blue.
Blue?
Yep.
Okay.
You could probably put 2 and 2 together between my favorite sports team and my favorite color.
Yeah. That adds up. Yep. If you were in a foxhole, who would you have there other than any family members?
In a foxhole? Oh, man.
These are hard. I mean, they are pretty intense. I know, but hey,
yeah,
you're in a hot seat.
I would probably, so it can't be family members. I would probably say whoever the smartest person is in the world at that particular time to help get me out of that foxhole is who I would want in there.
Wow, well, that's the best answer I've ever had so far. I think that's the answer. Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Definitely Rookie of the Year is one of my favorites. Moneyball and Fever Pitch. And I don't know if there's any correlation between the 3 or not, but those would probably be my top 3.
Okay. Favorite actor?
Favorite actor? Oh, boy. I would say Adam Sandler back in the day, with his movies Big Daddy, Anger Management. Now, currently, I would probably say maybe Brad Pitt, just because he's from Springfield, Missouri, and because of, I'm a big fan of Moneyball, so I would put him on the list as well.
Okay. If you're on a desert island, to music, I don't know what they call them now. There's no more CDs, there's no more albums, but you know what I mean. What two groups of music would you bring with you?
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and definitely got to give a shout out to my favorite band, ZZ Top.
Ah, okay. Are they from Missouri or not?
No, they're not. They're from Texas, but I've just
right.
always been a huge fan. But I'll tell you who is from Missouri, and this is going back in the day. The Ozark Mountain Daredevils, who sang. They're actually from Springfield, Missouri, and they sang the song. I don't know if you remember the song Jackie Blue.
Yes.
But yeah, so they're from
1977, I'm saying. This is going back to my era, right? About 77, 78, 75. Yeah.
And I'm 26, and I know all these songs and bands because I grew up in a house listening every Saturday was a 70s Saturday, so it was Boston, Styx, REO Speedwagon, Foreigner, Billy Joel. Those were all playing, at my house constantly. So I'm kind of a fan of that, not just the 70s, but just, kind of that time period, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Okay. You answered kind of one of my questions, but I'm going to say prior to 1990, your favorite baseball movie, not including Moneyball.
Oh, favorite baseball movie prior to 19...
Or just not including Moneyball. What's one of your favorite baseball movies besides that one?
Most people from that era, would say Field of Dreams. I'm actually not a big Field of Dreams fan. I've been to Field of Dreams, and it's a great place to visit. I'm not a big fan of the movie. So I would say favorite baseball movie outside of that would probably be Little Big League. Now, this was like 94 when it was written, so not quite prior to 90s, but hopefully that would count.
Okay. What's better, baseball or football?
What's better?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I mean, baseball.
Okay. All right. Just some words and what comes to mind. Vitamins.
What's that again? I'm sorry.
Vitamins.
Vitamins. Vitamin C, I guess.
Okay.
Is what I think of.
President Taft.
President Taft?
Yeah.
Oh. If I remember correctly, was he the one that got stuck in the bathtub? If I remember correctly.
He may have. He was a pretty big guy.
Okay, that might have been. I remember reading a book about presidents one time when I was a kid, and I just remember a president got stuck in the bathtub and had to be helped out. So I think it was Taft, but I didn't really pay attention as much in history as I probably should have. I'm full disclosure.
All right. What is a more beautiful animal, a lion or a giraffe?
Oh, a giraffe. A giraffe, definitely. Much more tame and peaceful.
Okay. And beauty.
Beauty. I would say beauty. In baseball terms, I would say Wrigley Field. Yeah, that's probably. But in life, I would say being at peace is beauty.
Ah, okay. I like it. Tyler, that was tremendous. I thank you. That was Tyler Onstott. I'm Ray Kay, and we will see you next time.